They sent their deadliest human to kill the last alien queen, but he froze when he saw a tiny baby in her arms. The winter frontier stretched across the planet like a graveyard God had forgotten to bury. Snow covered everything: the broken railroads, the burned farms, the frozen corpses of old war machines half swallowed by ice. Wind screamed across the plains hard enough to peel skin from bone, carrying ashes from towns destroyed years ago during the human-alien war. Nothing truly lived out there anymore except wolves, desperate smugglers, and ghosts. And somewhere beyond the frostbite mountains, the last alien queen. Inside a dim frontier saloon near the edge of civilization, no one spoke above a whisper when her name appeared. Lantern light flickered against old wooden walls stained with whiskey and smoke, while exhausted miners and bounty hunters huddled near iron stoves trying to survive the cold. She burned 20 cities. They say her voice can stop a man's heart. They say she still commands hidden armies beneath the snow. Fear had made the stories larger with every passing year. At the far corner of the saloon sat the only man who never reacted to them. A tall human in a black winter coat lined with frost. Snow melted slowly from the shoulders of his coat onto the wooden floor beneath him. A revolver rested low on his hip beside a hunting knife worn smooth by years of killing. His face looked carved from stone, hard jaw, tired eyes, and a long scar cutting across one cheek like frozen lightning. Nobody used his real name anymore. Across the frontier, people only called him one thing: the Reaper of Ash Canyon. The deadliest hunter humanity had ever produced. A military officer approached his table carefully, setting down a sealed metal case. The saloon quieted instantly. "You found her?" the hunter finally asked. The officer nodded once. "A scouting patrol tracked movement near the Frostbite Range 3 weeks ago. Alien tracks. Small campfires. Supply thefts." The hunter lit a cigarette slowly without looking up. "How many guards?" "That's the strange part," the officer muttered. "None." The hunter's eyes narrowed slightly. The officer slid a photograph across the table. It showed blurred footprints in snow beside the remains of an abandoned cabin. "High Command believes she's weakened," he continued. "Maybe dying. This is our chance to finish the war permanently." The hunter stared at the photograph in silence. "The Queen cannot be allowed to survive," the officer said firmly. "Neither can the child." The room seemed colder after those words. The hunter finally looked up. "Child? Intelligence suggests she recently gave birth." Several men inside the saloon exchanged nervous glances. Even now, the idea of an alien heir frightened them more than armies. The officer leaned closer. "If that infant survives, humanity may face another war someday." The hunter crushed his cigarette into the table. "When do I leave?" "Tonight." Outside, the storm had already begun. Snow fell violently beneath black skies as the hunter rode north alone across the frozen frontier. His horse pushed through deep drifts while icy wind tore at his coat. Behind him, the lights of civilization slowly disappeared until only darkness remained. Hour after hour, he traveled through a world buried beneath winter. Abandoned churches stood frozen beside empty roads. Burned wagons rested half-buried in snowbanks. Rusted alien war machines protruded from ice like skeletons of ancient beasts. Sometimes he passed wooden crosses sticking from the snow where entire families had died during the war. He never slowed. The cold no longer bothered him. Nothing really did. Years ago, when he was still young, aliens had descended upon his hometown during the early days of the war. By sunrise, the town was ash. His mother burned inside their home. His younger brother vanished beneath collapsing debris. The hunter himself survived only because soldiers found him wandering through smoke with frostbite covering his hands. Humanity had taken that broken boy and sharpened him into a weapon. Since then, he had hunted aliens across deserts, mountains, mining colonies, and ruined cities. He never questioned orders. Never hesitated. Never failed. Until now. 3 days into the journey, he reached the edge of the frostbite mountains. The peaks rose like giant white tombstones against the sky. Snowstorms moved violently between them. As he traveled deeper into the mountains, strange details began troubling him. Near a frozen creek, he found the remains of a military supply wagon, but instead of slaughtered soldiers, he discovered empty medicine crates carefully removed. Food missing? Blankets taken? Not weapons. Later, inside an abandoned mining shelter, he discovered tiny footprints beside larger alien tracks. A child. He crouched silently near the frozen ground. The tracks were recent. Another storm rolled through the mountains that evening, forcing him to shelter inside a collapsed church buried beneath snow. Wind screamed through broken stained glass while he sat beside a weak fire cleaning his revolver. His eyes drifted toward the tiny footprints still lingering in his thoughts. Why would a queen travel alone with an infant? Why steal medicine instead of ammunition? Why hide? The questions irritated him more than the cold. At dawn, he resumed the hunt. The mountains grew harsher with every mile. Snow reached his horse's chest in places. Frozen pine forests blocked the trails like walls of black needles. Wolves watched silently between trees at night, their eyes glowing pale in moonlight. Then, on the 6th day, he finally found her. Smoke. Very faint. Rising through the storm far ahead. The hunter dismounted immediately, and tied his horse behind thick trees before moving forward on foot. Snow crunched softly beneath his boots as he approached through the blizzard. An isolated cabin stood hidden between cliffs and pine trees. Small. Old. Barely standing against the storm. Warm orange light flickered weakly behind frosted windows. The hunter slowly drew his revolver. This was supposed to be simple. Kill the queen. Burn the cabin. Return home. But as he approached closer, he noticed something strange beside the wooden porch. Tiny handmade toys. A small blanket hanging near the door. And beneath the storm winds, he heard singing. Soft. Gentle. A woman's voice. Not a monster's. The hunter climbed the porch steps carefully, revolver raised. Snow blew violently around him, while the cabin creaked beneath the storm. His finger tightened against the trigger. One push. One bullet. That was all it would take. He kicked the cabin door open. The warm air hit him first. Then silence. Inside the cabin, firelight glowed softly across old wooden walls. Blankets hung near the hearth. Steam rose from a pot of soup above the flames. The place smelled faintly of smoke, medicine, and winter herbs. And there, beside the fireplace, sat the last alien queen. Not standing. Not armed. Not commanding armies. She looked exhausted. Her glowing pale blue skin was bruised beneath torn clothing patched together from military fabric and old frontier cloth. Long silver-black hair spilled messily over her shoulders. A thin metallic crown rested crooked against her head as though it had not been adjusted in days. But none of that stopped him. What stopped him was the tiny baby sleeping against her chest beneath the blankets. The child could not have been more than a few months old. Small. Fragile. Breathing weakly. The queen looked up slowly when the door burst open. Fear instantly filled her glowing eyes, not for herself, but for the infant in her arms. The hunter aimed directly at her forehead. The queen did not fight. Did not run. Did not beg for her own life. Instead, she pulled the baby closer protectively and whispered in a trembling voice. Please! The storm roared outside. Not in front of her. And for the first time in years, the deadliest human alive forgot how to pull the trigger. The cabin remained silent except for the storm. Snow battered the windows hard enough to rattle the walls while icy winds screamed through the mountains outside. Yet inside, beside the weak orange firelight, neither the human nor the alien queen moved. The revolver stayed aimed at her forehead. But the trigger never pulled. The tiny baby shifted softly beneath the blankets, letting out a weak cough that echoed through the room like a crack in stone. The hunter's eyes flickered downward instinctively. The child looked impossibly small. Tiny silver fingers curled weakly against the queen's chest, while fever flushed faint blue patterns beneath her skin. She was wrapped in old blankets clearly stitched and repaired dozens of times. One corner had even been patched using pieces of military uniforms. The Queen slowly lowered her eyes. "If you came to kill me," she whispered, "then do it quickly." Her voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. The hunter stepped farther inside cautiously, snow melting from his boots onto the wooden floor. He kept the revolver raised for another long moment before finally lowering it slightly. "You should have run," he said coldly. "I'm tired of running." Firelight danced across her face as she held the infant closer. Up close, she looked nothing like the monstrous war queen from military propaganda. Her shoulders trembled from weakness. Dark bruises stained the glowing skin along her arms. One side of her face carried an old scar barely hidden beneath silver-black hair. The hunter scanned the cabin carefully. No guards. No weapons. No hidden soldiers waiting in shadows. Only poverty. A broken rocking chair sat near the fireplace. Shelves held tiny amounts of dried food. Medical supplies were nearly gone. Melted snow filled rusted buckets for water. The place looked less like the refuge of a queen and more like the grave of a forgotten family. "You stole medicine from military wagons," the hunter muttered. The Queen nodded quietly. "For her." The baby coughed again. The hunter's jaw tightened. Outside, the storm worsened violently, swallowing the mountain trails beneath deep snow. Even he knew attempting to leave now would mean death. Without asking permission, he holstered his revolver and moved toward the fireplace. The Queen visibly stiffened. "If you try anything, you'd already be dead," he interrupted flatly. Silence returned. The hunter removed his gloves slowly and held his frozen hands near the fire. Across from him, the Queen never stopped watching him carefully, like a wounded animal waiting for the knife. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. The storm trapped them together inside the cabin while darkness consumed the mountains outside. Eventually the Queen rose weakly to stir a pot hanging above the flames. Her movements were slow and unsteady. The hunter noticed immediately. "You're injured." "It doesn't matter." "It does if you collapse." She ignored him, though pain clearly tightened her face with every step. Finally, while reaching for a bowl, her legs nearly gave out beneath her. The hunter caught her arm before she fell. The moment froze both of them. Her skin felt warm despite the freezing world outside. For a second either moved. Then she slowly pulled away. "Thank you," she whispered carefully, almost like the words were unfamiliar. He said nothing. Later that night, the baby's fever worsened. Tiny cries filled the cabin while snow hammered the roof overhead. The Queen sat beside the fire desperately trying to soothe her daughter, but panic slowly began breaking through her calm expression. The child's breathing became shallow. The Queen searched frantically through empty medical tins before finally lowering her head in helpless silence. "There's no medicine left," she whispered. The hunter watched quietly from the shadows near the wall. "You're telling me the last queen of your species can't save one child?" Pain flashed across her face. "She was born too early," the Queen admitted softly. "The cold is killing her." The baby whimpered weakly. For reasons he could not explain, something twisted painfully inside the hunter's chest. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. His younger brother coughing beneath burning debris years ago. His mother trying desperately to keep him warm while smoke filled the house. The hunter stood abruptly. The Queen looked up in confusion. "Where are you going?" "There's a military outpost 12 miles south." Realization filled her eyes instantly. "You can't ride through this storm." He grabbed his coat. "If the child dies tonight, your species dies with her. That's not your problem." The hunter paused near the door. For several seconds, snow howled outside while firelight flickered between them. Then he muttered quietly, "Maybe I'm tired of watching children die," and stepped into the storm. The blizzard nearly killed him. Snow blinded both rider and horse as freezing wind tore across the mountains like knives. More than once, he nearly vanished beneath collapsing drifts. By the time distant military lanterns appeared through the storm hours later, frost coated his beard and gloves completely. The outpost rested inside a narrow valley protected by wooden barricades. Human soldiers welcomed him instantly. "The Reaper?" one guard gasped. "What the hell are you doing out here?" "Need antibiotics," he answered coldly. The guard frowned. "For who?" The hunter's eyes hardened enough to end further questions. Inside the supply building, he stole everything the baby might need: medicine, blankets, powdered milk, firewood cartridges. One young soldier noticed the supplies and slowly pieced together the truth. "You found her," the soldier whispered nervously. "The Queen." The hunter loaded the supplies silently onto his horse. "Sir," the soldier said carefully, "orders are clear. The child cannot survive." The hunter stared at him for a long moment, then quietly replied, "Neither can you if you keep talking." By dawn, he returned to the cabin half frozen and bleeding from his shoulder after a wolf attack during the journey back. The Queen opened the door in shock as he collapsed against the porch railing. Snow covered him completely. Yet one hand still gripped the medicine tightly. For the first time since meeting him, true emotion shattered across the Queen's face. Not fear. Not caution. But disbelief. "You went back for her," she whispered. The hunter pushed the supplies toward her. "Just save the kid." The Queen immediately treated the baby beside the fire while the hunter sat against the wall, exhausted and pale from blood loss. Hours later, the child's fever finally began easing. The cabin changed after that night. Something invisible shifted between them. Not trust yet, but the beginning of it. Over the following days, storms continued burying the mountains deeper beneath snow, forcing them to remain together. Slowly, the sharp edges between hunter and Queen began wearing down through quiet survival. He repaired holes in the cabin walls. She stitched torn fabric on his coat while he slept. He carved a small wooden cradle for the baby using scraps from broken furniture. She smiled faintly the first time she saw it. And that smile nearly destroyed him. Because it was gentle. Human. Beautiful in a way he never expected. One evening they sat together on the porch wrapped in blankets while snow drifted softly beneath moonlight. The baby slept peacefully inside near the fire. For a long while either spoke. Then the Queen finally asked, "What happened to your family?" The hunter stared into the falling snow. "They died during the first invasion." "I'm sorry." "You didn't kill them." "No," she whispered sadly. "But my people probably did." The honesty in her voice cut deeper than excuses ever could. After a long silence, he finally asked the question haunting him since arriving. "If your species was so powerful, why are you hiding alone in a cabin?" The Queen lowered her eyes. "Because humanity already won." Pain filled the quiet words. She explained how the alien kingdoms collapsed years ago beneath endless war. Cities burned. Children starved. Survivors were hunted across the frontier like animals. Her king died defending evacuation ships while she escaped carrying their unborn daughter. "She's all that remains now," the Queen whispered softly. The hunter looked toward the sleeping infant inside. The last heir. The last future. And suddenly the mission no longer felt simple. That same night, while the Queen believed he slept near the fire, she quietly watched him from across the cabin. The scarred killer humanity feared most. The man who built toys for a child he was sent to murder. The man who rode through death for medicine. The man whose eyes looked unbearably lonely whenever the fire grew dim. Outside, snow fell endlessly across the mountains. But far below the cabin, new lights appeared moving through the storm. Torches. Riders. A military kill squad climbing toward the cabin through the frozen forest. And at their front rode the colonel himself. Because High Command had finally realized something terrifying. Their deadliest human had stopped obeying orders. The storm returned before dawn. Wind howled through the frostbite mountains like starving wolves while snow buried the forests deeper beneath white darkness. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly beside the sleeping child, but the peace did not last long. The hunter saw them first. Torchlights. Moving through the trees below the mountain path. At least 20 riders. Human soldiers. He stood slowly from the porch railing, his jaw tightening as snow gathered across his shoulders. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open softly. The Queen stepped outside holding the baby close beneath heavy blankets. Her glowing eyes followed his gaze toward the distant lights. "They found us," she whispered. The hunter checked the ammunition inside his revolver calmly. "They found me." The Queen's face paled slightly. "You should leave before they surround the mountain." He glanced back at her. "And tell them what?" he asked quietly. "That I froze because a baby looked too small to kill." The Queen lowered her eyes. Snow drifted gently between them. "You still have time to save yourself." The hunter stared at the approaching riders again. Then, after a long silence, he muttered, "I think I stopped trying to save myself a long time ago." The torches climbed closer. Inside the cabin, the baby suddenly began crying softly, frightened by the storm and the rising tension in the air. The Queen held her close, rocking her carefully while fear crept across her exhausted face. The hunter noticed immediately. And for the first time in years, protecting someone mattered more than surviving. He moved quickly through the cabin preparing for battle. Furniture was pushed against windows. Spare ammunition spread across the table. Lanterns were dimmed. He loaded rifles with practiced speed while snow battered the walls hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling beams. The Queen watched silently. "You cannot fight all of them alone." "Probably not." "Then why?" The hunter paused while tightening the strap on his rifle. "Because somewhere during those endless winter nights beside the fire, the mission had changed. The Queen was no longer the enemy. The child was no longer a threat. And the frozen cabin buried in the mountains no longer felt empty. "It's strange," he admitted quietly. "I spent years killing because I thought hatred was all I had left." His eyes shifted toward the sleeping baby. "But then she grabbed my finger one night." The Queen looked down at her daughter. "And suddenly," he finished softly, "I remembered what being human felt like." Emotion broke silently across the Queen's face. Before she could answer, a gunshot exploded outside. The cabin window shattered instantly. "Positions!" a soldier shouted through the storm. The attack had begun. The hunter reacted immediately, firing through the broken window as soldiers charged through the snow-covered trees below. Gunfire flashed violently across the mountainside, lighting the storm in bursts of orange fire. The Queen shielded the baby behind overturned furniture while bullets ripped through cabin walls. Outside, horses screamed. Men fell into deep snow. The hunter moved like death itself through smoke and firelight, every shot precise despite the chaos. 2 soldiers collapsed near the porch stairs. Another fell beside the frozen well outside. But more kept coming. The colonel finally emerged through the blizzard riding a massive black horse, snow swirling around his long military coat. "The Reaper!" he shouted. "Stand down!" Gunfire slowed briefly. The colonel stared toward the cabin with disbelief and fury burning across his face. "You were sent to save humanity!" he roared. The hunter stepped onto the porch with rifle raised. "No," he answered coldly. "I was sent to murder a child." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. The colonel's expression darkened. "That thing isn't a child." From inside the cabin came another tiny cry. Small, weak, terrified, and somehow more human than anything left in the war. "She's the last of her species," the hunter growled. "You already won. What more do you people want?" "Assurance," the colonel snapped. "Because monsters grow." The Queen slowly appeared behind the hunter holding the infant carefully against her chest. Snow blew through her silver-black hair while the child hid beneath blankets against the cold. The soldiers visibly stiffened. For years they had feared this woman like a nightmare. Yet now she looked exhausted. Thin. Protective. Almost heartbreakingly fragile. The colonel raised his revolver slowly. "Give me the child," he ordered. "And I may let you die quickly." The Queen held her daughter tighter. The hunter stepped directly in front of them both. "No." The colonel sighed heavily. You disappoint me. Then all hell erupted. Gunfire exploded across the mountains again as soldiers charged the cabin from both sides. The hunter fired relentlessly, forcing them back through deep snow while lanterns shattered around the yard. Horses crashed through fences. Smoke mixed with the blizzard until the world became white chaos and fire. One bullet tore through the hunter's shoulder. Another grazed his ribs. Still he kept fighting. Because every second he survived meant another second the child lived. Inside the cabin, flames began spreading along one wall where lantern oil had ignited. Smoke filled the room rapidly. The cabin's burning, the queen cried. The hunter grabbed her arm. Back trail, he coughed. There's a cliff path behind the ridge. They escaped into the storm moments before the cabin collapsed behind them in a roar of fire and sparks. Snow swallowed the mountainside as they ran through frozen trees. The queen struggled through deep drifts carrying the child while the wounded hunter covered them from behind. But eventually, the colonel cornered them near a frozen cliff overlooking the valley. The world turned silent except for the wind. The hunter stood barely upright now, blood soaking through his coat. Soldiers slowly surrounded them through the snow with rifles raised. The queen understood immediately. There was no escape left. Tears filled her glowing eyes as she stepped beside the hunter. You've already done enough, she whispered softly. Please take her. The hunter looked down at the tiny infant wrapped in blankets. The child stared back at him with wide glowing eyes. Then, very slowly, she reached her tiny hand toward him. Not toward the queen. Toward him. The deadliest human alive. The soldiers froze. Even the colonel hesitated. Because the child looked at the hunter with complete trust. No fear. No hatred. Only innocence. And suddenly the war looked monstrous. The colonel's face twisted with rage. She'll become another queen, he shouted. Another monster. No, the hunter said quietly. Snow drifted around them. She'll become whatever this world teaches her to be. The colonel fired first. The hunter reacted instantly. 2 gunshots cracked through the mountains together. The colonel staggered backward, collapsing into the snow near the cliff's edge while blood spread beneath him like spilled ink. Silence followed. The remaining soldiers lowered their weapons slowly. No one moved. Because none of them could explain why killing a mother and child suddenly felt wrong. One by one, the soldiers backed away into the storm. Then they were gone. Only snow remained. The hunter collapsed moments later. The queen caught him before he hit the ground. Blood stained the snow beneath his body while his breathing weakened rapidly. Panic overtook her immediately. No, no, stay with me. For the first time in years, the queen cried openly. Not for a kingdom. Not for a throne. But for one wounded human. Through the storm, she carried him back toward the ruins of the cabin while dawn slowly began rising over the mountains. Pale golden sunlight finally pierced the endless winter clouds for the very first time. Weeks passed. The storm softened. Snow slowly melted from the rooftops of a rebuilt cabin deeper in the mountains where nobody would ever find them. The child grew stronger. The queen laughed again sometimes while cooking beside the fire. And the hunter, the feared reaper of Ash Canyon, learned how to live without hatred. One quiet morning, snow drifted softly beneath golden sunrise as he stood outside the cabin holding the tiny child carefully in his arms. The baby giggled softly while grabbing his finger. Behind him, the cabin door opened. The queen stepped onto the porch wrapped in warm blankets, silver-black hair glowing softly beneath the morning light. Without speaking, she rested her head gently against his shoulder. The hunter closed his eyes briefly. For years he had searched the frontier for something worth surviving for. He finally found it at the edge of a frozen world. Not in war. Not in revenge. But in the arms of the family he was sent to destroy.